Here is Vinta Aegean Armada. I'm sure I butchered that. This is a light dusty purple with a gentle appeal on the page that stands out as definitely not being a ballpoint. There is little, if any, tone variation as the paper changes, and it is a consistent shader. On non-fountain pen friendly paper, it is very well behaved with no bleeding, no feathering, even on the 20-pound copy paper. Now, Vinta seems to be a lot of shimmer and sheen inks, but not here. Thankfully, as either would have really diminished the great color we have got here. There haven't been very many Vintas that I've wanted a bottle of, but this is one that I would be very happy to get more extended use out of, and so maybe I'd consider a bottle.
The pen for today is a Mnemosyne Fission. Now that we know my opinion on this ink, let's see how we got there by looking at the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine.
This is a great example of that light, dusty, slightly different kind of purple that we're going to see here. It does not feather. It does not spread. It does shade very well. Look at rigid. The R is lighter than the I, quite a bit darker. The G goes to a nice mid-tone into the I. That downstroke of the D, much darker. Now, in general, we don't get a lot of words like general here, which are mostly one tone, though a close look at it would show that it does have some very slight tone or shading going on. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding, no ghosting, and can easily continue our notes back here.
Vinta makes more than just one ink, so let's take a look at a few other inks from Vinta. Here is Vinta Summer Green Carnival. Here is Vinta Mother of Pearl Nacre.
Here is Vinta La Paz.
The second writing sample is done in a Portage Reporter notebook.
Here we can see the tone is just a bit lighter, just a little bit flatter than it was on the Clairfontaine, though not bad in itself, still being a good dusty purple, with no feathering, with no spread, with still having shading, even when it's minor. Drop, it at least shows up at the end. Surface shows up in the U and the E, even the F in the middle. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding, no ghosting, no problems. Continuing the story as we've turned the page.
There's a lot to be learned by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. A line of ink is put down to immediately put into water to show the separation of those colors, making the ink. Now the one on the right is marked with a D. This is allowed to dry for 10 minutes before it's put into water. The third writing sample is done in a national brand Steno notebook.
The tone we get on a page here is definitely lighter, not as a result of the tone of this paper, but from the makeup of this paper. I do think this is a little bit translucent in ink, as we're seeing a very slight shift in that, putting the yellow in with the purple, making it very, very interesting. We have no feathering, no spread, great shading all the way throughout. Take a look at great here on the third line, where the G is a little bit darker into the R, lightening just a little bit at the E, lightening some more at the A, light into the T, but dark down out of the T into the at the end. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding, no ghosting, and can easily continue writing back here, making this a good match.
Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. Now, this smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. In the upper left, you can see where there is highlighter. In the upper right, that is pen flush. The lower left has a 1/3 bleach solution, and the lower right has plain old water. The next writing sample is done in a Rhodia notebook.
Here we get the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It does not feather. It does not spread. It does shade just as well as it did on the Clairfontaine. Absolutely. Take a look at absolutely. And you can see a ton of tone shift back and forth practically from letter to letter. Most important thing we're looking here is what goes on with that quad rule. It does stand out as a tone on the quad rule. And sometimes on this paper, ink gets cut by the ruling. It does not, which really shows that this is a very well-performing ink. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding and no ghosting, making this great.
With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at a few more violet or purple inks.
Here is Birmingham Pen Company Waterford Dusk. Here is Califolio Bergogni. Here is Cross Violet. Here is Diatramentis Pearl Violet.
All of the inks that you just saw have a review here on the channel. Now, the next writing sample is done in a composition lab notebook.
Here the tone is considerably lighter than it was on the Clairfontaine. No color shift, just got lighter as a tone. It does not feather and it does not spread. It does shade, not as well as on the Clairfontaine, but well enough to make us happy here on Earth. Take a look at Earth here on the second line. Starts lighter and just continuously works its way darker till it gets very dark with that H at the end. But that's not the only word it does it on. It does it on but right next to it. It's but as in, let's consider another option, not a derriere. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding, no ghosting, only great performance. I think if a student used this in their lab notebook, I'd be especially proud of them.
While it's nice to see inks that are in the same color family, I prefer to find inks that complement the color on the page.
Here is Kaweco Palm Green. Here is Organic Studios Arsenic Gray. Here is Krishna Mandara. Here is Noodler's Golden Brown.
The best way you can support this or any channel that you like watching is to alert the retailer of where you saw the product at time of purchase. Now, the last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper.
The tone here is definitely lighter. I feel like it's showing off a little bit more as a light purple on this paper, but differently than it did, really showing that dusty tone here. No feathering. Yes, it has some spread because it's copy paper, but the spread's not out of control. This is very usable on this paper. There's even little moments of shading that you can see, which are not always common when it comes to the copy paper. So that is some great news with great performance so far. Looking at the back of the page, we do see some light ghosting going on. I probably would not continue writing on the back of this page. However, it did not bleed through touching the page underneath.
So what nib and pen do I think are going to give the best writing experience with this ink?
The Mnemosyne Fission Broad Nib is a little dry with this ink, and it gives a fairly consistent tone and very active shading. Now, I was curious about the tone from a wetter pen, so off camera, I tried it in a wet medium pen, and the tone noticeably darkened, but the shading stayed strong. Nice. I would say this does well from every pen, by flow or by nib size, but I liked it best, the tone that I saw in the review. So I would go for a medium to dry flow, medium or broad nib.